So close your eyes for just a second. I want you to try and picture the sounds of this vibrant, impossibly wealthy metropolis right at the absolute height of its power.
Oh, yeah, like the ultimate ancient superpower.
Exactly. You hear the clatter of chariot wheels on perfectly paved stone streets. You hear the rhythmic chanting of, like, thousands of sailors hauling cargo from ships docked in this massive circular harbor.
Just a society that truly, fundamentally believes it has conquered the world.
Right. And then a rumble deep in the earth. A sound so low you literally feel it in your teeth before you hear it in your ears.
The ground completely gives way.
Yeah, the ocean rears up, turning from this calm blue to just a wall of chaotic, violent gray water. And in a single day, in a single night of misfortune, that entire world is swallowed by the mud and the sea.
The screaming crowds, the golden temples, all that unparalleled knowledge just gone.
The water settles and it's gone. I mean, it is the ultimate disaster story, right? The original lost world.
It really is. It's the story that has haunted human imagination for literally thousands of years. It's a concept that feels almost, well, primal, you know?
Yeah, totally primal.
This deep-seated idea that everything we build, no matter how magnificent, can just be erased overnight.
And we are so obsessed with that primal fear that humanity has spent hundreds of years and, honestly, untold millions of dollars trying to find this place.
Oh, absolutely. We launch submarines, we scan the ocean floor with radar.
We pore over satellite imagery looking for concentric circles in the desert. I mean, we want Atlantis to be real so badly.
We really do.
But today, on this deep dive, we are going to look past all that modern treasure hunting. We are tracing this ghost all the way back to its actual birthplace.
Right, the original source.
Exactly. We are unpacking a massive stack of sources today. We're digging into the ancient Greek philosophy that started it all, looking at how a 19th century politician basically warped that philosophy into a global conspiracy.
Which is a wild story on its own.
It's so wild. And finally, we'll explore the very real, scientifically verifiable lost cities that are currently sitting at the bottom of our oceans. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to do that, we really have to start at the very beginning. Because before you can hunt for a sunken continent, you have to actually read the map.
Right, you need directions.
Yeah, and the only original map we have is a philosophical dialogue written by the Greek philosopher Plato around 360 BC. Everything, and I mean everything you have ever heard about Atlantis, stems entirely from this one single source.
The text is called the Timaeus. And, you know, if you're imagining this dusty old parchment with a giant X marking a spot in the Atlantic Ocean, you need to completely adjust your expectations right now.
Oh, for sure. It is definitely not a geographical text.
Not at all. It's essentially the script of a highly intellectual dinner party. We have Socrates meeting with a few of his well-educated peers, guys named Critias, Timaeus, and Hermocrates.
And they were just sitting around discussing the concept of the ideal state.
Right, like how a perfect society should be governed, how citizens should be educated, that sort of theoretical thing.
And the setup here is actually crucial. The day before this specific conversation, Socrates had supposedly laid out his vision for a theoretical utopia.
Okay.
He detailed this strict division of labor-like, separating farmers from the warrior class, and even pushed controversial ideas like abolishing private property for the ruling class.
Wait, really? No private property?
Yeah, to ensure they wouldn't be corrupted by greed.
Yeah.
So, having built this perfect city in his mind, Socrates tells his friends that he feels like a person looking at a really beautiful painting of animals.
Oh, okay, I think I see where this is going.
Right, it's nice. But he wants to see those animals actually moving. He wants to see his theoretical, perfectly governed city put to the test in a real high-stakes conflict.
He essentially wants to take his pristine model city out for a test drive in a war zone.
Exactly. And that is the exact moment a guy named Critias chimes in.
He says he has the perfect story for this. It's strange, but he insists it's completely true, and he proceeds to tell a story that has been handed down through his family.
And honestly, the chain of custody on this story is just wild.
This is exactly where I have to throw a flag on the play. Because, okay, Critias says he heard it from his grandfather.
Right.
The grandfather heard it from a relative named Dropides, and Dropides heard it from the legendary Greek lawgiver Solon. I mean, it's ancient hearsay.
It gets much more complicated than that, actually, because Solon didn't invent the story either. According to Plato's text, Solon traveled down to the Egyptian delta.
Oh, right, to that political hub called Sais.
Yep, Sais. The citizens there considered their founding deity Neith to be the exact same goddess the Greeks worshipped as Athena, so they were very welcoming to a prominent Greek figure like Solon.
So Solon is hanging out with the elite Egyptian priests, and he tries to impress them with his knowledge of antiquity.
Yeah, he starts recounting the oldest Greek history he knows, the story of the first man, the survival of a great deluge. He's proudly computing dates and tracing ancient genealogies for them.
I just picture Solon leaning back, incredibly proud of his ancient Greek trivia, and the Egyptian priests are just looking at him with total pity.
Oh, it's definitely pity.
There is this amazing condescending moment where an incredibly old priest looks at Solon and says, "Oh, Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you."
It's a brutal academic takedown. He basically tells them the Greeks are young in their minds, that they have zero ancient traditions.
No science hoary with age, that's the quote, right?
That's the one. And the priest backs up that insult with a fascinating explanation of celestial mechanics.
Right. He tells Solon that mankind has suffered many destructions, the greatest by fire and water.
And he specifically references the popular Greek myth of Phaethon.
Oh, the kid with the sun chariot.
Exactly. In that myth, the boy Phaethon borrows his father the sun's chariot, loses control of the horses, drives too close to the earth, and basically burns up the landscape.
Before being struck down by Zeus. Which, just sounds like a standard mythological fable. A cautionary tale about a kid driving his dad's sports car into a ditch.
Right, but what's fascinating here is that the Egyptian priest tells Solon the Greeks have completely misunderstood their own myth.
Huh.
He says it isn't a fairy tale, it is a mythologized memory of a real celestial event. The priest explains that it signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth,
Resulting in a great conflagration. So he's talking about cyclical, cataclysmic, cosmic events.
Exactly, perhaps meteor strikes or intense solar phenomena. The priest's theory of history is that the earth is regularly purged, sometimes by fire, wiping out mountain dwellers,
And sometimes by a massive deluge of water, which sweeps all the coastal cities into the sea.
Yeah, so the priest is telling Solon that Greek history keeps hitting the reset button. The floods come, wash away their cities, kill all their educated people.
And the survivors in the mountains have to start civilization completely over from scratch, with literally no memory of what came before.
While Egypt, according to the priest, is uniquely immune to this cycle.
Because of the Nile, right?
Yes, the geography of the Nile Delta means their water comes gently up from below, rather than pouring down violently from the heavens. Because they are spared, their temple walls preserve the continuous written records of all these ancient events.
The priest is essentially saying, we have the actual data of human history, while you Greeks are constantly wiped out, forgetting who you are, and starting over like children.
Exactly. Plato uses this supposed Egyptian authority to give incredible ancient weight to his story.
Okay, but let's just trace this entire narrative framework for a second. We are reading a philosophical text written by Plato, who is writing a dialogue for a character named Critias.
Right.
Critias is telling a story about his grandfather, who heard it from a politician named Solon, who heard it from an unnamed priest in another country.
Who is allegedly translating ancient temple registers about an event that supposedly happened 9,000 years prior.
It's like an ancient, high-stakes game of telephone. I mean, as a modern reader, you have to question the historical validity right out of the gate, based purely on how convoluted that setup is.
It is the ultimate, I know a guy who knows a guy origin story. But within that incredibly nested framework, the Egyptian priest finally delivers the core narrative.
The main event.
Right. He tells Solon that 9,000 years ago, there was an ancient Athenian society that embodied the absolute pinnacle of human virtue and governance.
The perfect state that Socrates had been dreaming of.
Exactly. And this perfect ancient Athens was forced to face down a massive, unprovoked empire that emerged from the Atlantic Ocean. This invading superpower was Atlantis.
And Plato really goes out of his way to emphasize how terrifyingly massive Atlantis was. He places it explicitly outside the Mediterranean.
Beyond the Pillars of Hercules.
Right, which we know today as the Straits of Gibraltar. He describes Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia put together.
It was essentially a continent.
Yeah, from Atlantis, you could island hop to an entire opposite continent. And this empire didn't just stay on their island. They conquered parts of North Africa as far as Egypt and Europe as far as central Italy.
They were a global, militaristic superpower. And this vast power gathers all its strength to subdue the entire Mediterranean region at a single blow.
This is the ultimate test Socrates asked for.
Yep. The ancient Athenians, abandoned by all their allies, stand completely alone. Through sheer courage, tactical brilliance, and moral fortitude, this humble society defeats the bloated Atlantean invaders.
They push them back, liberate everyone, and save the known world from slavery. Sounds like an epic movie.
It really does. But the story takes a massive left turn here, because there is no victory parade for the heroes.
Yeah, the text says that immediately after the battle, violent earthquakes and floods occur. And in a single day and night of misfortune, the victorious Athenian army sinks into the earth.
And the entire continent of Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea.
Yeah.
Both the good guys and the bad guys are completely wiped off the map.
Plato even adds this neat little geographical bow to the end of the narrative. The priest claims that because this massive landmass sank, the ocean outside the Straits of Gibraltar became an impassable shoal of mud.
Which is a very convenient detail.
Oh, incredibly convenient. It explains exactly why no Athenian sailor in Plato's era could just sail out into the Atlantic and find the sunken ruins. The ocean was supposedly too thick with mud to navigate.
Exactly.
Wait, I'm confused by the ending of the story, though. If Plato is writing this to make Athens look like the ultimate heroes, the saviors of the Mediterranean, why does he have them sink into the mud immediately after winning?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive.
That is a terrible ending for a patriotic story. What is his angle here? Was he intending for anyone in his circle to actually take this literally, or is there some hidden agenda?
Well, the overwhelming scholarly consensus going all the way back to antiquity is that Atlantis is purely an allegory.
Okay.
And to understand the ending, we have to look at the two main ways historians interpret that allegory. The first is the pro-Athens theory.
Right, because less than a century before Plato wrote this, the real historical Greeks had fought off the massive Persian Empire.
Exactly. In this view, Atlantis is just a mythological stand-in for Persia. It's a patriotic parallel. Look how great our ancestors were. They fought off an empire even bigger than Persia.
But, I mean, that still doesn't explain why he sinks his own heroes at the end.
Which brings us to the anti-Athens theory, which frankly makes much more sense when you look at Plato's broader philosophical critiques.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Plato is actually deeply critical of the Athens he was living in. After defeating Persia in the real world, Athens had become this powerful, overreaching, wealthy naval empire itself.
Ah. They became exactly what they had defeated.
Right. In this interpretation, the story is a grim warning. The Atlanteans, as Plato describes in a later dialogue, were initially a good people, but they became corrupted by immense wealth and imperial ambition.
They lost the gods' favor due to arrogance and hubris.
So under that theory, Atlantis isn't Persia at all. Atlantis is actually a mirror reflecting Athens back at itself.
Wow. That's actually brilliant.
Precisely. Plato was looking at his own contemporary society, seeing them become an arrogant imperial power, and he was using this myth to say, look at what happened to Atlantis when they got too big, too rich, and too aggressive.
The universe destroyed them. Do not let that happen to us.
The ancient Athens that wins the war in the story represents the humble, moral society Plato wished his city still was. Atlantis represents the bloated, doomed empire he feared his city was becoming.
And the destruction at the end is just the universe restoring balance by erasing the hubris, while tragically taking the ancient Athenians with them to hit the reset button.
Yep. It makes perfect sense for a political philosopher. He's constructing a very elaborate morality play.
But you know, some of the researchers in our sources point out a very strange counterargument here that throws a major wrench in the pure fiction theory.
Oh, the linear B thing.
Yes. There's a specific detail in that conversation with the Egyptian priest that is genuinely hard to explain away. When the priest is talking about the cyclical destruction of the Greeks, he mentions that the Greeks used to have a system of writing.
Right.
But they lost it during one of these cataclysms and basically had to relearn how to write all over again from scratch centuries later.
That is a fascinating, highly anomalous detail. Because historically, modern archaeology tells us that is exactly what happened.
It's spot on.
During the Bronze Age, the Mycenaean Greeks had this complex palace economy and a functioning writing system that we now call linear B.
But then around 1200 BC, you get the late Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah, a massive systems collapse across the Mediterranean. Earthquakes, droughts, and invasions by mysterious groups known as the Sea Peoples led to the violent destruction of these palace centers.
And when a society collapses like that, they don't just lose their building.
No, they lose their institutional knowledge. The scribal class, the few people who actually knew how to read and write linear B, were completely wiped out.
The surviving Greeks scattered into smaller, isolated farming communities. They entered what we call the Greek Dark Ages.
For centuries, the Greeks were completely illiterate. The knowledge of writing was entirely erased from their culture. It wasn't until much later that they encountered Phoenician traders, adopted the Phoenician alphabet, and learned how to write all over again.
And here is the catch that makes Plato's texts so weird. The Greeks of Plato's time in 360 BC had absolutely no idea that Linear B ever existed.
They had never dug up the tablets.
Right. They thought the Phoenician-derived alphabet was their first and only writing system. The historian Herodotus wrote about it as if they had never written a single thing down prior to the Phoenicians.
So how on earth did Plato know about a lost era of Greek writing?
That is the core of the historical truth argument promoted by scholars like James Maver. If Plato fabricated the entire Atlantis story out of thin air just to make a philosophical point, how did he accidentally stumble onto the incredibly accurate historical truth about a lost writing system?
It strongly suggests that he wasn't inventing everything. He might have been working with genuine, fragmented historical lore.
Perhaps actual records imported from Egypt.
Yeah, that preserved a dim, mythologized memory of the Bronze Age collapse.
So it's kind of like, imagine watching a really high-concept sci-fi movie. It's using real cutting-edge quantum physics equations written on a chalkboard in the background to tell a fictional story about time travel.
Right.
Just because the physics equations on the board are completely accurate to the real world, it doesn't mean the aliens with laser guns flying the spaceship are real.
That's a great analogy.
Plato could easily have taken a real scrap of ancient historical data like the loss of writing and woven it into a totally fictional parable about an empire called Atlantis, just to make his political warning sound more credible.
And to truly understand how Plato operated and why he would invent an ordered Athens defeating a chaotic Atlantis, we actually have to look past the Atlantis story itself.
Because it's just the intro, right?
Exactly. The Atlantis narrative is merely the prologue to the Timaeus. The vast majority of the text is Plato detailing the creation of the universe itself. And when you read it, it reveals a mind that is absolutely obsessed with mathematical proportion, structure, and geometric order.
Obsessed is almost an understatement. The character Timaeus takes over the dialogue and explains that the universe was created by a benevolent entity called the Creator,
Who looked out at the pre-existing visible matter, which was just moving in a chaotic, discordant, and completely irregular fashion.
and the Creator's entire goal was to bring order out of that chaos, to make the universe as good and as mathematically perfect as possible.
Timaeus explains that the Creator frames the universe as a single, perfect, solitary globe. He specifically chooses a sphere because it is the geometric figure that comprehends all other figures, having its extremes perfectly equidistant from its center.
He makes the surface perfectly smooth. Plato writes that the universe has no eyes because there is nothing outside it left to see.
It has no ears because there's nothing to hear.
It's such a bizarre, almost mechanical view of a living cosmos. He doesn't give it hands to grasp enemies or feet to walk, so it is given a circular, revolving motion on the same spot.
Which Plato considers the movement most closely associated with pure mind and intelligence.
He even claims that time itself didn't exist before this. Time was created alongside the heavens as a moving image of eternity. While true eternity rests in a static unity, time revolves according to number days, nights, months, years.
It's all about quantifiable structure for him.
But where it gets incredibly dense, and where we see Plato's obsession with structure reaching its absolute peak, is his geometric theory of reality.
Oh, the triangles.
Yes. Timaeus explains that God fashioned the four classical elements, fire, water, earth, and air. But he didn't just conjure them, he built them out of triangles.
Before the universe was ordered, these elements existed only as faint, chaotic traces. God gave them form and number using right-angled and scaling triangles.
Okay, let me make sure I'm picturing this right. Plato is essentially saying the entire physical universe is built out of microscopic, triangular Lego bricks.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It's an early, highly geometric form of atomic theory. He argues that Earth is the most immobile and plastic of the elements, so it is assigned the cubical form built from triangles with highly stable bases.
And fire is the most mobile, cutting, and sharp element, so it is built out of pyramids.
Air and water have intermediate geometric forms, like an octahedron and an icosahedron.
And these microscopic shapes dictate exactly how the elements interact in the real world. Plato explains that fire feels hot and painful to us because its microscopic pyramidal particles are physically sharp.
They literally cut into our flesh.
Yeah. When you eat a piece of food, the newer, sharper triangles of your digestive system are literally doing microscopic warfare, battling and slicing up the older triangles of the food you ingested.
It's so visceral. And he applies this rigid geometric logic directly to human anatomy and the soul. According to the Timaeus, the gods placed the divine, immortal part of the human soul in the head,
Why?
because the head is spherical, imitating the perfect divine shape of the universe itself. The rest of the human body was just constructed as a fleshy vehicle to carry the spherical head around so it wouldn't tumble over high and deep places.
I love how he rationalizes human anatomy. The neck isn't just a physical joint. Plato calls it an isthmus, a geographical barrier designed to separate the divine soul in the head from the mortal, polluted soul in the body.
He further divides that mortal soul too. The courageous, passionate part of the mortal soul is placed in the chest, nearer to the head, so it can listen to reason.
But the appetitive soul, the part that desires meat, drink, and physical pleasure, is placed all the way down in the belly.
Plato describes it vividly. He says it is chained up down there like a wild beast at a manger.
It is kept as far away from the council chamber of the head as possible so it won't make noise and disturb the intellect.
He has a wild functional explanation for every single organ. The liver, for example. We know it filters blood and aids digestion. Plato says God made the liver solid, smooth, and bright like a mirror, so that the power of thought from the mind could literally bounce off it.
Wait, really? A mirror for thoughts?
Yeah. It was designed to frighten the lower desires with bitter bile, but also to reflect gentle inspiration and allow for divination during sleep. He literally says, God placed the seat of prophetic divination in the liver to give our foolish lower nature a tiny measure of truth while we dream.
That is just wow. Even hair has a structural purpose for him. It wasn't just aesthetic, it was created as a light covering, a natural helmet to protect the brain from extreme temperature changes.
Without impeding our quickness of perception, everything in Plato's universe has a purpose, a mathematical ratio, and a geometric structure.
In this framework, disease, old age, and death only happen when the geometric triangles of our body loosen over time. They lose their sharp edges, they fail to cut up the incoming food triangles, and the bodily structure collapses.
Which is fascinating ancient science, but I can hear the listener asking, what does any of this have to do with Atlantis?
Right. Why are we doing a deep dive into microscopic triangles and shiny livers in an episode about a sunken city?
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture and pull back to look at the whole text, we realize that Plato's physical universe is an exact macrocosm of his political universe.
Oh, okay.
To Plato, physical health equals perfect geometric balance. A healthy body is ruled by the spherical head, keeping the wild beast in the belly subdued. Disease equals an imbalance of those triangles.
Therefore, in the political prologue, the ancient city of Athens represents perfect geometric and spiritual health,
They are the perfectly balanced society, ruled by rational thought.
while Atlantis represents an imbalance of the elements. They became bloated with excessive wealth. They were driven entirely by the lower appetitive soul chained in the belly of the empire.
Atlantis was not just a political enemy. They were a societal disease. The sinking of Atlantis wasn't just a random physical earthquake.
It was the geometric universe physically correcting a gross mathematical and moral imbalance.
Exactly. That context changes the entire reading of the story. It proves that the Atlantis narrative was never intended to be a historical travelogue.
It was the opening metaphor for an insanely complex book-length treatise on cosmic geometry and moral health. And for over 2,000 years, almost every educated person who read it understood that.
Atlantis faded into academic obscurity. It was just a weird little footnote in Plato's philosophy.
Until the 1800s.
Right. When one specific man decided to strip away all the allegory, take the myth completely literally, and birth the entire modern Atlantis obsession.
We are talking about Ignatius L. Donnelly. In 1882, Donnelly, who was a populist politician and a former U.S. congressman from Minnesota, published a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World.
And it is impossible to overstate the impact of this text. This single book changed the entire trajectory of the Atlantis myth.
He took Plato's philosophical metaphor and essentially declared to the world, no, Plato wasn't writing an allegory. This is absolute, literal, geological history.
Donnelly was the ultimate promoter of a concept called hyperdiffusionism.
Which is the idea that all known ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Greeks, didn't develop agriculture or architecture independently. Instead, he argued, they all descended from one single highly advanced source culture, And for Donnelly, that original source was Atlantis.
He laid out 13 specific hypotheses in his book that attempted to prove this massive claim, and his claims were incredibly sweeping.
Oh, absolutely. He argued that Atlantis was the region where man first rose from a state of barbarism to actual civilization. He claimed that Atlantis was the true, literal geographic site of the Garden of Eden, the Elysian Fields of the Greeks, and Asgard of the Norse.
He proposed that the gods and goddesses of all these ancient pantheons were not divine beings, but actually just confused, mythologized historical recollections of the mortal kings and queens who had once ruled Atlantis.
And he didn't stop at mythology. He dug into technology and language. He claimed the Atlanteans invented iron manufacturing. He claimed they literally invented the Phoenician alphabet, which he said was somehow passed directly to the Mayans of Central America.
Right. He said the mythologies of ancient Egypt and ancient Peru were just scattered remnants of the original Atlantean religion of sun worship.
He basically took Plato's philosophical essay and turned it into the ultimate ancient civilization conspiracy board, complete with red string connecting an Egyptian pyramid to a Mayan temple to a Greek god.
You know, reading Donnelly's stuff today, looking at it strictly historically, you can't really separate his bizarre ancient history theories from his 19th century worldview.
No, you can't.
The sources reveal that Donnelly was explicitly writing about Atlantis as the origin point for a superior white Aryan race. It's heavily baked into his premise.
Yeah, and we really need to state clearly to you, the listener, right here, that we are sharing this strictly as a historical report of the source text. We are doing this to explain the origins of these fringe theories.
We are absolutely not endorsing Donnelly's racial viewpoints.
Not at all. We are just examining how those 19th century biases shaped the mythology. It shows how someone takes a blank canvas, an ancient mystery, and projects their own era's intense racial and cultural biases right onto it.
This raises an important question about how we project our own cultural anxieties.
Yeah.
Because he was writing during the Gilded Age in America.
Right, the 1880s. This was a time of incredibly rapid, chaotic industrialization. You had massive wealth inequality, the rise of the robber barons, intense labor strikes, and deep social anxiety about the future of the Republic.
Exactly. Donnelly was a populist who felt society was fracturing. So his version of Atlantis was actually a utopian projection. It was a stand-in for his idealized vision of America.
He imagined Atlantis as this perfectly ordered society, but one that ultimately succumbed to corruption.
And just like Plato used Atlantis to warn Athens, Donnelly used the fall of Atlantis as a thinly veiled political warning to his own contemporaries.
He explicitly compared the decline of Atlantis to the potential decline of the American and British empires, arguing that if the modern elites became too corrupt and greedy, they too would be washed away by the tides of history.
It's fascinating how he basically copied Plato's rhetorical trick, but applied it to 1880s geopolitics. He's dressing up his modern political anxieties in ancient clothing.
And the wildest part of the Donnelly story is how much of his groundbreaking research he just, lifted from other people.
Yeah, the sources show he heavily plagiarized elements of his book from other 19th century writers, like John Thomas Short's work on North American antiquity.
But despite the plagiarism, the intense racial bias, and the incredibly flawed pseudoscience, Donnelly's book was a massive runaway bestseller.
It heavily influenced later esoteric writers like Madame Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society.
By publishing this book, Donnelly essentially provided the blueprint for almost all modern fringe history. He took the story completely out of the realm of abstract philosophy and shoved it into the realm of literal, physical exploration.
Thanks to Ignatius Donnelly, the literal hunt for Atlantis was officially on. People weren't just sitting in universities debating Plato's geometric triangles anymore. They were packing their bags, chartering boats, and looking for a sunken continent.
But where do modern searchers actually look? Because, the ocean is huge. Our sources detail a whole list of geographical suspects that people have investigated over the last century, and honestly, the sheer variety of locations is staggering.
Let's start with a major recent suspect, Spain. Specifically, the Doñana National Park in Andalusia.
Okay, what's the evidence there?
In 2011, a U.S.-led research team used digital mapping, deep ground radar, and underwater technology to survey the massive coastal mudflats there. They claim to have found several memorial cities hidden beneath the mud.
Theoretically built by survivors of a massive tsunami that allegedly swept away the original Atlantis.
Right. Then, building on that, in 2018, a UK-based team called Merlin Burrows used commercial satellite imaging and claimed they found a specific greenish-blue patina on the buried ruins in Doñana.
which perfectly matched Plato's description of the colored stones used in Atlantean buildings.
But the broader scientific community was not buying it at all. Ken Feder, an anthropology professor, threw up massive red flags. He pointed out that Merlin burrows entirely bypassed the rigorous scientific process.
They didn't excavate, they didn't invite independent analysis, and they refused to publish their findings in a peer-reviewed archaeological journal.
So, if the Spanish mudflats are a bust, what about a location with actual catastrophic history, like the island of Santorini in Greece?
Santorini is a much more historically grounded suspect. It was the home of a massive Minoan settlement called Akrotiri. This was a highly sophisticated, wealthy, seafaring civilization.
That was completely and violently wiped out by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history around 1613 BC.
A 2022 documentary highlighted heavily detailed frescoes and artistic items found buried in the ash at Akrotiri that strongly resemble Plato's descriptions of Atlantean wealth and architecture.
The sudden, violent destruction of a powerful island civilization by geological forces matches the narrative mechanics of Atlantis perfectly, even if the dates 1600 BC versus Plato's 9,000 years and the geography don't align perfectly with the text.
Then you have Malta sitting right in the middle of the Mediterranean. Malta is dotted with some of the world's oldest freestanding megalithic temples, proving an incredibly advanced ancient civilization lived there long before the pyramids were built.
Back in 1854, a Maltese architect actually spent his entire life trying to prove his island was the remnant of Atlantis. Modern documentaries have suggested that massive chunks of the island broke away and sank during a huge prehistoric earthquake.
And we absolutely cannot forget the Azores, the Portuguese archipelago way out in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Ignatius Donnelly himself argued vehemently that the Azores were the surviving mountain peaks of the sunken Atlantean continent.
While the modern discovery of plate tectonics entirely discounted Donnelly's idea of a massive sunken mid-Atlantic continent, we now know the ocean floor there is spreading apart, not sinking. The theory persists.
Yeah, as recently as 2019, a Portuguese archaeologist claimed that 2,000-year-old burial structures found on the islands proved they were inhabited by an ancient, advanced seafaring civilization long before the Portuguese officially discovered them.
There's also Agadir, a sun-soaked tourist city on Morocco's Atlantic coast.
Why there? Well, its name is linguistically linked to the Phoenician word Gades, which is a region Plato explicitly mentioned.
Plus, it's geographically very near the Straits of Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules. A German computer scientist named Michael Hübner actually took all 51 geographical descriptors from Plato's text, plugged them into a statistical mapping program, and the algorithm pinpointed the Agadir region as the most likely match.
The sheer number of conflicting locations is incredibly telling. Researchers, both professional and amateur, are taking specific, isolated fragments of Plato's text.
A mention of volcano here, a phonetic similarity to the word Gades there.
And they are building entire sprawling theories around them, while conveniently ignoring the parts of the text that don't fit their chosen location. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How can one single ancient city be located in Spain, Greece, Malta, Portugal, and Morocco?
It obviously can't.
It highlights the fact that modern seekers are retrofitting the ancient myth to match whatever anomalous geological or archaeological feature they happen to be investigating at the moment. Or, frankly, they're matching the myth to wherever they'd prefer to go on a sunny research vacation.
To truly understand how these modern theories operate and how easily geological evidence can be manipulated to fit a predetermined conclusion, we need to deeply investigate one of the most viral, popular theories currently circulating online.
The Freed structure.
Better known as the Eye of the Sahara.
Oh, this one is everywhere. If you've spent more than 5 minutes on social media looking at history videos, you've seen satellite images of the Richet structure.
It's a massive geological dome in the middle of the Mauritanian desert in northwest Africa.
It measures 25 miles across and forms perfectly concentric rings of raised ridges and deep depressions. And I have to be completely fair here. When you look at it from space, it looks staggeringly like Plato's description of Atlantis' circular layout.
Yeah, Plato described rings of land separated by rings of water, and the Eye of the Sahara looks exactly like a giant petrified bullseye.
Proponents of the Eye of the Sahara theory have compiled a list of evidence that seems incredibly compelling if you don't look too closely.
First, they tackle the elevation problem. The Eye is currently high and dry in a desert, but Plato said Atlantis was destroyed by the ocean.
So they argue that the northwest corner of Africa was actually at sea level 11,000 years ago. To support this massive geological claim, they point to a real scientific fact. The coast of West Antarctica is currently rising by about 4 centimeters per year.
They take that 4-centimeter rate, extrapolate backward over 11,000 years, and basically apply it to Africa, suggesting the Sahara could have been 440 meters lower and covered in ocean water.
They also point to physical evidence on the ground. They highlight white salt deposits found inside the concentric rings of the structure as definitive proof that it was once filled with evaporated ocean water.
And they also have to tackle an obvious linguistic hurdle. Plato explicitly called Atlantis an island, using the ancient Greek word nisos. And the eye of the Sahara is hundreds of miles inland, firmly attached to the massive continent of Africa.
To get around that, the proponents argue that 11,000 years ago, during the African humid period, the Sahara was lush and full of massive megalakes.
They claim that the Greek word nisos didn't strictly mean an island in the ocean. It just meant a region surrounded by lakes or rivers.
They even back this up by pointing to a real map based on the work of the 5th century BC historian Herodotus, which clearly shows a group called the Atlantes living near the Atlas Mountains in North Africa.
When you stack all those claims up, the satellite imagery, the shifting sea levels, the salt, the linguistics, the ancient maps, it sounds like a completely watertight case.
I can see why it goes viral, but what happens when you actually hold those claims up to the light of modern geology and linguistics?
The sources systematically dismantle every single one of those claims, piece by piece. Let's start with the sea level argument, because the science there is fundamentally flawed.
Okay, break it down for us.
Yes, the landmass of Antarctica is currently rising. That is a real geological phenomenon known as isostatic rebound. But it is caused by a very specific mechanism: the melting of massive, miles-thick ice sheets.
For millions of years, the unimaginable weight of that ice pushed the continental crust down into the Earth's mantle.
As the ice melts due to climate change, that weight is removed, and the crust slowly rebounds upward, like a sponge expanding after you stop pressing on it.
Wait, so they are taking a geological reaction caused by melting ice in the Antarctic and just blindly applying it to the Sahara Desert?
Exactly. Northwest Africa is situated on a massive, highly stable piece of the Earth's crust called the West African Craton. It hasn't been covered by heavy ice sheets in hundreds of millions of years.
There is absolutely no geological mechanism that would cause the eye of the Sahara to rapidly uplift 440 meters in the last 11,000 years. The region has been geologically stable and above sea level long before humans even existed.
Okay, the uplift theory is busted. But what about the salt deposits? You can literally see the white salt in the photos. If the ocean wasn't there, where did the salt come from?
The salt didn't come from the ocean, it came from the rocks themselves. Millions of years ago, when the region was subjected to different climate conditions and had flowing rivers, water washed over the dome.
The water chemically eroded the surrounding igneous rocks, dissolving the natural salts and minerals.
That mineral-rich water pooled in the depressions between the rings of the structure. When the climate dried out and the water evaporated, it left the salt behind. It's a common geological process.
Furthermore, if the salt was left over from the entire region being under the ocean just 11,000 years ago, you would find massive, continuous salt deposits everywhere in the surrounding desert.
Right, not just highly localized deposits concentrated inside the depressions of the eye. That brings us to the linguistic argument. The claim that the Greek word nisos just meant a region surrounded by lakes rather than an island.
This is where reading the actual primary source rather than a summary is vital. While nisos can occasionally be used loosely, Plato didn't just use that one word.
He explicitly paired it with the word pelagos, which definitively translates to the deep, open sea.
Furthermore, in the Timaeus, he describes the Atlanteans as sailing from their island to other islands, and eventually across the ocean to the opposite continent.
He leaves absolutely zero linguistic doubt that he was describing a landmass surrounded by a massive navigable ocean, not a piece of land trapped in a lake district.
And what about that map by Herodotus? The one showing a tribe called the Atlantes right next to the Atlas Mountains? That seems like a smoking gun for placing Atlantis in North Africa.
It is another massive case of confirmation bias that ignores historical timelines. Herodotus was referring to a specific nomadic tribe of people, not an advanced urban city or a global empire.
He called them the Atlantes, simply because they lived near Mount Atlas.
But here is the critical picker. The Atlas Mountains are located in modern-day Morocco and Algeria. They are hundreds of miles away from the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania.
Moreover, those mountains were named after the Greek titan Atlas long after the Atlantis myth was supposedly established. Historically, if you look at texts as recent as the time of Homer, the Titan Atlas was imagined to live far to the west, just past Greece, nowhere near the deserts of Mauritania.
The names match because of later Greek geographic naming conventions, not because of an ancient supercity.
It's incredible how quickly a viral theory falls apart when you actually understand the physical mechanisms behind the claims.
It's exactly like looking up at the sky, finding a cloud shaped perfectly like a dog, and going on the internet to claim you've discovered a brand new biological breed of floating spaniel. Looks can be incredibly deceiving when you completely ignore the surrounding context.
People look at a neat satellite photo, they see concentric circles, and their brains immediately fill in the blanks with the Atlantis myth they've heard since childhood.
They completely ignore the rigorous geological science that proved the Eye of the Sahara is just a naturally eroding dome of magma that never actually breached the surface.
But here's the most important takeaway from all of this debunking. If the Eye of the Sahara is a bust, and Plato's original story is almost certainly a philosophical allegory based on geometric triangles and political hubris, does that mean the ocean's completely empty? Are there no lost cities at all?
Absolutely not. And this is where the investigation gets really good. Because the truth of what is actually down there on the ocean floor is far more fascinating than Donnelly's crystal-wielding Aryans or a viral desert mirage.
The ocean is literally littered with genuine, verifiable, historically vital lost worlds.
Let's look at Pavlopetri, located off the coast of Laconia in Greece. It is officially the oldest known submerged city in the world, dating back over 5,000 years to the Bronze Age.
It was discovered in 1967, and it sits in just 3 to 4 meters of water. What makes Pavlopetri so incredibly unique is that it possesses an almost completely intact town plan.
We aren't just talking about a few scattered blocks. We are talking about clearly defined streets, courtyards, two-story buildings, and complex chamber tombs.
And the technology archaeologists use to explore it is mind-blowing. A team from the University of Nottingham teamed up with Australian robotics experts to map the site.
But you can't just take a normal photograph underwater. The water distorts the light, and the sediment makes it murky, so they used a technique called stereophotogrammetry.
How exactly does that work in a marine environment?
Well, they use underwater robots equipped with high-resolution cameras to take thousands of overlapping 2D digital photographs of the ruins from slightly different angles. Then they feed all those overlapping images into specialized software that identifies common pixel points across the photos.
The software calculates the depth and corrects for the water refraction, stitching those thousands of 2D images together to build an incredibly accurate, millimeter-precise 3D mesh model of the entire sunken city.
It allowed them to survey the site without disturbing a single stone. And what they found was that Pavlopetri wasn't some mystical, philosophical utopia. It was a thriving, bustling, practical textile center.
They found tons of loom weight scattered in the houses, perfectly preserved streets, and large clay pathari pots imported from Crete, proving it was a major node in the ancient Minoan trading network.
But Pavlopetri didn't sink in a single day and night as a cosmic punishment for moral hubris. Science tells us a much more practical and, frankly, more terrifying story of how cities die.
When Pavlopetri was built in the 4th millennium BC, it was situated safely on a coastline about 2 or 3 meters above sea level. Over centuries, global sea levels slowly rose.
By 1200 BC, the town was only 1 meter above the water, making it highly susceptible to storm surges and flooding. Then, sometime between 480 and 650 AD, tectonic plate activity struck.
A series of intense earthquakes literally altered the landscape, causing a geological phenomenon called subsidence, which pushed the bedrock of the site down by 3 meters. The combination of slowly rising sea levels and sudden tectonic drops completely submerged the city forever.
And the incredible thing is, Pavlopetri is just one example. Our sources highlight Thonis Herakleion in Egypt. About 2,300 years ago, this was one of the world's greatest, wealthiest port cities.
It was the mandated port of entry for all Greek trade coming into Egypt. But around the 2nd century BC, it completely collapsed into the Mediterranean.
Archaeologists believe the immense weight of the city's massive stone temples, combined with a severe flood or an earthquake, caused the waterlogged clay and sand beneath the city to undergo liquefaction.
The solid ground literally turned to liquid mud, and the heavy stone structures just sank into the sea. When divers finally located it in the early 2000s, they found unbelievable, perfectly preserved artifacts.
Like a giant stone statue of the god Hapi, intricately carved sphinxes, hundreds of ancient anchors, and caches of gold coins.
If we move to India, there is Dwarka. In Hindu tradition, this was the magnificent, gold-laden ancient kingdom of the god Krishna. It supposedly sank underwater around 3,500 years ago.
For centuries, it was considered pure myth. But marine excavations off the modern coast of Gujarat have revealed ancient 3,000-year-old pottery, massive stone blocks, and the remnants of heavy stone fortifications lying at the bottom of the ocean, giving a very real historical foundation to the ancient epic.
We even have relatively modern examples. In the UK, there's a place called Ravensworth. It was a thriving 13th century medieval trading port located on a sandbank in Yorkshire.
It was a major player in English trade, boasting 400 houses, a bustling harbor, its own court, and a prison. But it was built on shifting sands. It didn't sink instantly in an earthquake. It suffered a slow, agonizing death by coastal erosion.
Over decades, the sea just kept eating the sandbank. People slowly abandoned it as their homes fell into the water, until a massive, historically documented storm in 1362 finally engulfed whatever was left.
The ocean doesn't just swallow cities. It can swallow entire landmasses. Scientists analyzing the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean noticed a massive geological anomaly.
The island itself is volcanic and relatively young, only about 9 million years old. But when geologists analyzed the lava brought up from deep underground, they found zircon crystals embedded in it that date back over 3 billion years.
Zircons only form an ancient continental crust, not in new oceanic volcanoes. By analyzing these crystals and mapping the gravitational pull of the ocean floor, scientists identified Mauritia, a literal prehistoric lost microcontinent resting beneath the waves.
It was violently torn apart and sunk by tectonic forces during the breakup of the Gondwanaland megacontinent 200 million years ago, long before humans existed, and was eventually covered up by newer volcanic islands.
So what does this all mean? We're so obsessed with finding the one mythical Atlantis that we ignore the fact that the ocean floor is already littered with genuine lost worlds. Reality has outdelivered the myth.
What I find so striking is the massive contrast between these real, scientifically verified sites and the philosophical myth of Atlantis. These real cities weren't destroyed by a disappointed creator trying to correct a geometric imbalance of triangles.
They were victims of ruthless, indifferent natural mechanics. The grinding of plate tectonics, the slow brutality of coastal erosion, soil liquefaction, and natural climate shifts. They are incredible archaeological time capsules, but they're also incredibly fragile.
For instance, Pavlopitri survived underwater for 5,000 years, but it is currently under severe threat of total destruction, not from the wrath of the gods, but from modern shipping.
Small tourist boats drop anchors that drag across the ancient walls, shifting the protective sediment. Large commercial ships in Vatika Bay illegally release ballast water, which introduces aggressive, invasive microorganisms and toxic chemicals that are actively eating away at the fragile, submerged ruins.
It creates a powerful irony. We have spent hundreds of years and millions of dollars so utterly obsessed with finding the mythical city of Atlantis that we often completely ignore the fact that the ocean floor is already crowded with genuine, irreplaceable lost worlds that desperately need our funding and protection right now.
So let's zoom out and synthesize the massive journey we've taken today. We started inside the brilliant, highly structured mind of Plato in 360 BC.
We saw how he constructed an intricately ordered geometric universe built of microscopic triangles, a world where every single organ in the human body had a specific moral and mathematical purpose.
In that context, we realized that Atlantis was never meant to be a physical map coordinate. It was a philosophical construct, a fictional societal disease designed specifically to teach his fellow Athenians a harsh, sobering lesson about the dangers of imperial hubris.
We then watched how that brilliant philosophical metaphor lay dormant for 2 millennia until the 19th century. We saw how Ignatius Donnelly hijacked the story, stripped away all of Plato's nuanced allegory, and infused the myth with his own Gilded Age, political anxieties, and deeply flawed theories about human origins.
Inadvertently birthing the modern pseudoscience of hyperdiffusionism. We observed how that stubborn, literal interpretation of a metaphor spawned a modern cottage industry of confirmation bias.
It leads people to point deep ground radar at muddy Spanish swamps or to look at a naturally eroding geological magma dome in the Mauritanian desert and see a sunken empire.
Completely ignoring all the rigorous historical linguistics and actual geological physics in the process.
But ultimately, we discovered that while Atlantis the empire is a fiction, Atlantis the phenomenon, the terrifying reality of great human cities swallowed whole by the indifferent sea, is an absolute, verifiable historical truth.
From the sunken Bronze Age streets of Pavlopetri, to the drowned stone sphinxes of Thonis Heracleion, to the shifting sands of Ravensor Odd, the hard evidence of our fragility is down there in the dark.
And honestly, I think that is exactly why the story of Atlantis endures, and why we will probably never stop looking for it. It's not just an ancient puzzle waiting to be solved. It's a mirror.
History isn't a static painting. The very ground beneath our feet is constantly shifting, rising, and falling. The Atlantis myth speaks to a primal, universal human fear. The terrifying realization that no matter how technologically advanced, how wealthy, or how militarily powerful our civilization becomes, nature always has the final say.
It really forces you to put our own modern world into a geological perspective.
It does. Think about our great coastal megacities today. Miami, New York, Tokyo, London. Millions of people, trillions of dollars in infrastructure, convinced we have conquered our environment.
But if global sea levels continue to rise and tectonic plates continue their slow, grinding march across the mantle, which of our glittering, invincible metropolises will become the Atlantis of the year 12,000?
And when future high-tech archaeologists plunge their submersibles into the murky depths to map the ruins of our submerged skyscrapers, will they view our fallen cities as a grim, moral, cautionary tale of ultimate hubris? Or will they see us simply as another beautiful, fleeting chapter in the endless, brutal cycle of human creation and natural destruction?
This is Seek and Explain. Like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy your stay.